Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montavilla Sewing Center, and today I'm going to show you how to make this cover for your sewing machine. Now, there are a lot of different configurations of machines. Sometimes you have a serger, which is more square, and sometimes you have bigger or longer machines. I'm going to show you how to fit a cover to your machine. This is nice for traveling. It's going to protect your machine well when you move it from place to place, like in your car. But it has a place right here for your handle, which also leaves the thread exposed. Now the thread could get dust on it. Dust could get into your tension system and mess with your stitches. So to have it completely covered, looks nice, it's convenient, you just whip it off when you're ready to sew. So first of all, we got to make a pattern. Now I'm using an old sheet, actually part of an old sheet, and I'm going to use that. The reason why we want to make a pattern is because different machines are different sizes, different configurations, like your serger is more square, your sewing machine may be longer than this. So use a sheet to make a pattern. Now I'm putting it on here, leaving plenty of room on all sides, and then making sure it's on grain, and I'll tell you why that's important. If it's slightly off grain, you can see it stretches more. So we want it to fit fairly evenly. So I'm going to pick it up on this end, tuck it in a little bit, and that's going to help me when I go to pin fit it, because it will stay put. Now, to pin fit, you want to give it a generous amount of room and just pin fit it all down these corners on all four corners. Make sure that's nice and even, and give it a generous amount of room. You don't want to have it really tight. Okay. Put 3 or 4 pins on each corner, making sure not to shift it or move it in any way as you go. All the way down to the table. We're putting pins in here to show where our seam line is going to be. Now we're going to straighten these pins out, but that will show where our seams are going to be on each corner. Now, under here on this side, this is where the head of the machine is. You want to make sure not to pinch it in too much. It should be a straight line from that corner all the way down to the corner of the machine near the table. Now we've got about 4 or 5 pins on each side going all the way down to the corners. At this point, we want to mark where those pins are on both sides, so that way we'll know where our seam line is going to be. And again, it looks a little wobbly, but we're going to straighten this up. And remember, this is just the pattern. This is also a pin that I'm using where the marks are erasable. As you can see, there's some fitting ease to allow it to slide on and off the machine. After pin fitting, we want to trim out extra fabric, leaving about 3 inches or so. Before you take it off the machine, we want to mark what the front is. I'm going to just put an X mark right here, like that. Now these are the marks that we made earlier while it was still on the machine, and that's where the pins were approximately. We're going to true up these lines. As you can see, they're a little bit uneven. Now if you're going to go one way or the other, go towards the corner, because that's what you're going to be trimming out. We want to leave the inside part to be nice and generous. So I'm going to go about like that. Okay. And then I'm going to do this one. Again, make it generous. Now this is going to be the seam line. We also want to be cutting the seam allowance, and I'm going to allow a 1/2 inch seam allowance right there. So marking that. This is now going to be the cutting line right here. I like using a quilting ruler because you can see right through it where your previous line is. It's easy to mark that cutting line right there. Okay, seam line, cutting line. If you need to, you can actually mark it as cutting line just for your purposes. And we're going to go ahead and repeat this for all 4 corners. Remember, this is the part you're going to cut out. This is the part that you're going to leave as your pattern. Next, we're going to cut out these corners. Notice I've marked the cutting lines as distinct from the seam lines. I'm using my rotary cutter and ruler, but of course you can use scissors if you don't have these tools. I like this because it makes a nice sharp cut. And it's grippy on the bottom so things are not going to slide. There we go. Part way into the corner, being very careful not to cut into the seam. There we go. And that corner is removed. We do the same thing with all 4 corners. This is what it looks like after we have trimmed out the corners. At this point is where we decide what fabric we're going to use for the cover of the machine. Now, we waited till this point because we needed to know about how much fabric we need. So I measured this. It works out to about 43 inches to about a yard wide. And so that is pretty typical of quilting cotton. It's usually about 43, 42 inches wide, and a yard of fabric is going to be enough. So I got this wonderful fabric out of my stash. It's a little over a yard long, and it is quilting cotton, so it's 45 inches wide. I'm going to get those pins fairly close to that top corner there so we can get a good idea of how it fits. And as long as you have your edges pretty much even, you can just pin on one line, and it will be about where it needs to be on the other side. Now, these are just the old marks from when we originally fitted it onto the machine. Okay, I'm going to do this on all 4 corners the same way. Next, we want to put it on the machine, making sure that X mark is on the front of the machine. That will make sure it fits, and that's important because this machine is not symmetrical side to side or front to back, so we need to make sure have everything fitted just right. Now, my fabric is wider than it is long, and so it's going to be longer measuring this way. So I'm going to put it across the machine this way. And I'm just leaving it this way for now. I'm going to move it around so that the pattern fits it just right. But this way we've got the pattern going the correct direction. We don't have it flipped over or turned around. So at this point we just take it off the machine. And then I'm going to need to take my pins out. Okay, now that I've got the pins out and everything laid out nice and flat, nothing twisted or pulled, you will notice that my marks are on the inside right here. That's important for the fabric to be fitted over the machine. Also, you'll probably notice that we have these overlapping a little bit. That's not a problem because remember, when we were pinning it on, we allowed an extra little bit of fabric, about 3 inches or so. If you're concerned about that, then what I would suggest you do is get 1.25 yards of your outer fabric and just turn it that way. 1.25 yards would be about that far. Okay, next we need to cut this out. Now I'm just using my regular fabric shears here and cutting right along the original line. Now you're probably going to want to line your cover, which means we're going to have a separate piece of fabric. It will help give the cover more body. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the cover the outer fabric that you just cut out to be your pattern. You'll go wrong sides together, so your lining fabric, same size as your original fabric that you cut out. It's going to be wrong sides together on both of them, and that's how you know to cut it out. Now, if you're using a more like denim or twill or something, you may not need to use a lining, in which case you will still need to make sure and seal the seams either with a serger or with zigzag. In this case, I'm going to be just using this sheet piece for the lining for this. Now, my marks are going to be on the inside, so I know everything matches up just perfectly, because this wrong side is going to go to this wrong side when we've got it all finished. Now we need to get the edges lined up so that we can sew them. So go right to that corner. Remember, we've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to put my pins parallel to the seam line. Of course, not on the seam line, but that way I can sew next to them and keep it pinned while I'm sewing. Then I take them out at the appropriate time. Right. Now, this is going to end up being cut off, so we don't want to have a back stitch here. We could just sew it down maybe 2 inches from the bottom or something like that. We're going to be trimming that out later on. Now we're ready to sew. So make sure you have center needle position, and we're in straight stitch, probably 2.5 for your stitch length, and we find that 1/2 inch mark right there, and we're ready to sew. Okay, make sure you put a back stitch there. You can take this out. I'm watching right there at that 1/2 inch mark to make sure I get a nice even seam. All 4 corners are done. Next we do the lining the same way. Just make sure that your marks are on the outside, because this is going to be right side of the fabric, this is wrong side of the fabric. When you were cutting out your outer fabric, if you didn't mark what the front is, like I did with the safety pin, then what you can do is try it on your machine different ways just to see how it fits. I tried it on this way. It looks like these are not right on the corners, so I'm going to turn it around and try it this way. That hangs much better. As you can see, this part of the machine is angled in like this a little bit, and this seam fits just right. So now I know that this is the front, so I marked it with a safety pin. Now we're going to put the two together, wrong sides together. So we find the X mark on this part here, wrong sides together, this way, and go this way. Now, how do we get these corners matched up? I'm going to show you that, because it's important to pin those corners. So you take and put your finger right up at that corner there, put it right up into this corner here. And then we put a pin there. Next, go to the next corner. Match those two up. It doesn't matter which way the seam allowances go, because there's enough play in the fabric, but you do want the seam allowances close to each other, so I'm going to try that again. There we go. Okay, that right up to the corner. And it's important to get those matched up. Now you don't need to sew them in place, just for fitting purposes. Okay, there we go. And then the last corner. Put my finger right up in that corner there, and I'm being careful not to pin myself. That's important. There we go. Okay, now again, find the front. Find the inside of the lining and put that right on your machine. Now it probably would help to turn off your machine, unplug things, and maybe lower that needle down into the machine so that it doesn't get caught there. And that way, these are out of the way. Fit it just this way. Make sure everything's nice and straight on the inside. Next, we're going to need to trim the hem. And I like to trim the hem so it's pretty much even with the table, and that way I can turn it up maybe ½ an inch or even less, and it'll hang really nicely. But to make sure I'm doing it right, I'm going to use my marking pen and make little marks. So mark and measure twice and cut once. Okay, now we take this off of here. I move my sewing machine out of the way, making sure that each corner hangs just right. Get that corner up there. Yes, there we go. Seam to seam, hanging just right. And it might even help to just kind of pin it together a little bit just to make sure it stays put. Remember, you're going to have this machine cover for years and years, so you want it to look nice. There we go. All right, there we go. Put that there. Now we're going to pin it on the outside, but just above these lines that I made for marking where our hem is going to be. I'm using a notebook so I don't pin through all the layers. Now I'm going to mark the fold line, so I'm going to be cutting a little bit beyond that. It's important to remember that you want everything nice and flat. I'm just marking from one seam to the next, and as I have previous lines marked, I'm going from where that line hits the seam line to where it hits the seam line on the other side. These are the seams, the corner seams right here. So let me go ahead and do that. All right. And now we have all 4 lines marked. I'm going to go. Now when I trim this, I'm going to give it a generous trim in case I need to kind of even things up a little bit. I'm going to leave things pinned and go ahead and start trimming. Start on one of these generous edges and cut this starting about an inch or so away. But we're looking at the lines that we just drew. All right. Now let's find the front. The front is right here. These things out of the way. Grab our machine. and put this on here. Again, notice I don't have it plugged in. The cords are out of the way off to the side. I probably have enough room in here that I could leave it plugged in, but for fitting purposes, I'm just trying to make sure everything fits really nice, front and back. And it looks like it does. Okay. So at this point, we're ready to actually sew this together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste it all the way around, removing my pins, and then I'm going to turn up my hem and sew it. Notice how I have the corners matched up just right. That will help it hang correctly. Now what I'm going to do, rather than baste it, I'm just going to go ahead and zigzag. So we're going to choose two, oops, right here. We're going to choose two, number 2 stitch for zigzag, and we've got the full width right there. And I want to check all 4 corners to make sure they're matched up well enough. Yeah, okay, so let's go for it. This will do 2 things. It will seal the raw edge and it will keep the 2 layers together. Now that little extra tuck won't matter because we're going to be turning it up. Remove the pins. Next, we need to turn up that hem. So we're doing one more fitting to make sure everything's good. I haven't turned up the hem yet, but I'm just about to do that and it looks great. If I turn it up right along that line, that should be just perfect. And I do like to pin it because it keeps the layers together. And again, I'm pinning it away from where I'm going to be sewing, so I'm going to pin it right in the middle like that, all the way around. And I may need to kind of put a little bit of a tuck right there at the corners because the corner seams are angled outwards a little bit. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So when I pin this here, see how there's extra fabric there? So we want to put a little bit of a tuck right here. It's not going to show from the outside. In fact, I'll put it this way. There we go. There we go. I'm going to use a longer stitch length because it's got a lot of layers it's going through, and I'm going to start on one of the corners, actually near one of the short sides is probably the best way to do it. Okay. Now what I'm going for, since I have a pretty even seam allowance, I want to go for the same distance between the edge of the fabric. Let's go back to regular stitching there. The edge of the fabric and the edge of the foot. Let's get started there. And we've sewn all the way around. Now it's time to trim the threads nice and neatly. Make sure there aren't any other threads that need to be trimmed. Looks good. Okay, let's try it on the machine. Now I like to have my needle down for a cloth cover. Let's see how it fits. Beautifully. And we're done with our cover. So now we've covered our sewing machine. You can also make your cover to fit sergers, which are more square or a little bit odd shaped. Now you can also make this single layer if you had like denim or twill, in which case you would need to make sure and finish the seams on the inside with zigzag or serging. You can also piece this. Like if you had a large orphan quilt block or maybe some fat quarters that you haven't used, you can use those to make a beautiful machine cover as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. We have lots of other videos here on our Montavilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.